Добрый день. К сожалению, не буду говорить по-русски. I would speak English. This is my, if we might say, a better professional language. So, just to introduce a few words, I'm from Warsaw University, from the English department, and my background is really in English philology, plus a degree from Notre Dame University in the United States in sociology or social theory. So I'm a bit away from purely historical or historic investigations, but I would like to say a few words today about nationalism in Poland, which is in many respects a rather different phenomenon than we find in this part of Europe, mainly because until the partitions, which is the loss of Poland's independence, the concept of the nation in the First Republic or the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was really a political concept, not an ethnic or religious one. So it was the political nation, or the gentry as the political elite, who considered themselves a nation. Whatever else was there was the people, the folk, but the political nation was not concerned with the origin, that is, members of the Lithuanian, Ruthenian, Polish, and other gentry groups were actually considered equal and participated in the process of, let's call it, running the country. So this Polish paradox is defined by the fact that although it was a monarchy, it was called a republic, and it was only called the Kingdom of Poland after the partition and under the first Russian rule before the November uprising. So these differences in self-definition are kind of difficult to put into some particular frameworks of definition. As a matter of fact, the concept of a nation understood in these terms would correspond much better to the American case, where Americans speak of nation, they speak of citizenship. And therefore, it is distant from ethnic or religious background. But that, of course, changed with the loss of independence, and then having to face the, if we might say, identity difficulties or identity problems, the Polish political class has redefined itself, if we might say, and therefore went into the ethnic and religious definition, and hence the concept of the Catholic Pole became the one that identified that what the core of the nation was supposed to be. And of course it was the result of the competition and self-identity in reference to Orthodox Russian Empire, Protestant or evangelical Prussian Empire, and the only one that seemed to be corresponding along the religious lines was Austrian-Hungarian. So, in a sense, what happened, I would like to, this whole idea permeated and transformed until Poland regained independence in 1918, and then this, if we might say, cluster of ideas, religion and ethnicity, became an issue, particularly in competition with other groups that composed the Polish society before 1939. That is, we have to keep in mind that it was a very complex religiously, linguistically, and ethnically society. If we consider this, the ethnic Poles were about 55% of the total of the population, and it somehow followed this, what published in 1703 in London Description of the World said that there is a saying in Europe that if you go to Poland and if you lost your religion and you cannot find it there, you will not find it anywhere. And the idea was not of intensity of religion, but the fact that the whole spectrum of religious beliefs were represented, because the monarch was not really defining what was the, if we might say, the religious identity of the subjects, who, after all, were considered themselves citizens, as they were electing the monarch. So, in that sense, they functioned as a kind of a republican nation. So, when the new state emerged, well, then there was, of course, an attempt to redefine national identity, and as it was also done in competition with the attempt by other ethnic groups in Poland, Ukrainian, Jewish, Silesian, Belarusian, and so on and so forth, each tried to redefine their identity as to the political agent in this particular situation. Then the Polish national movement, which was mostly associated with Roman Dmowski and his national democracy, which originally had a liberal, democratic, and modernistic flair, but after Dmowski's religious conversion, he added a strong Catholic dimension to it. And in this sense, we might say that it sent the Polish model, modern, if we might say post-First World War model of nationalism, into the direction of a cluster that is continuing the 19th century identification of the state, ethnic nation, and Roman Catholic religion. So I have a presentation here, but it was not. You didn't put it on. It's here. Yeah. Oh, this way. Okay. So in a sense, it's a kind of a symbolic vision of the leader, the cross, and the colors. And it is important to see Roman Catholicism as really the basis for modern nationalism in Poland, because it was not so much associated with the sovereign state as the Roman Catholic Church providing a platform for identity. So I have already mentioned that. And then another tendency, which is again anti-modernist, if we might say, and trying to separate itself or distinguish itself from the direction in which the European unification takes place, finds its expression in Pan-Slavic, which of course here you are well familiar with, and kind of anti-Western attitudes. So, this religious nationalism is an element of the political orientation of the Polish identity understood in terms of nationalism. And the following we will identify here: Christian national movement. These are major groups. These are Stronnictwo Chrześcijańsko-Narodowe, Obóz Wielkiej Polski, Obóz Narodowo-Radykalny, Falanga. And these are radical, national Catholic, anti-Semitic orientations, partly fascist. They were established in the between the wars period, so of course they followed specifically the Italian model, the Nazi model seen as too competitive as to the position of the state. And then the pre-Christian orientation, a nationalist movement which is Unia Młodych, Unia Społeczno-Narodowa, Zadruga, and the orientation is anti-Catholic from moderate to radical, from Pan-Slavic to National Slavic, anti-Semitic and totalitarian elements. Anti-Semitism, of course, is present because about 10% of the then population of Poland was of Jewish background, and this sort of tension between the ways and lifestyles of the mostly urban and rural, if we might say, land-based gentry and peasant orientation provided the tension here. This was an attempt to put these kind of elements together into some kind of a symbolic form. And so this is a monument of the concept of the monument to Józef Piłsudski, as you know, the founder of the other version of the Polish nation, which is based in this Jagiellonian multicultural, multi-religious, open model of nationalism. So citizen-like rather than ethnic background. So, of course, during the post-war, during the war and post-war period, the demographic situation in Poland underwent a radical change, in effect producing what we might say a mono-cultural, mono-ethnic, mono-linguistic, and in a sense monocultural type of a society, which Polish nation has never been until after the Second World War. So it, of course, produced different self-definitions and understanding of what it means to be. Then, during the communist period, which, as you know, particularly in the until 1956, the so-called nationalist deviation was considered something that had to be suppressed. So again, all talk of nationalism was considered was considered taboo. And then after 1989, with the general pro-Western orientation and adoption of most of these liberal concepts, those who were opting for a more hardcore nationalist view or self-identification found this a tendency or a move that was oppressive. And so, confronting with the globalization and European unification, we have a kind of revival of the nationalistic tendencies, which do not, of course, apply to the whole society, but to a particular part of it, which in many respects either felt not particularly happy with the transformation effects or found themselves short-shrifted in the, so to speak, distribution of political power. So you have here some of the potential definitions of the new identity of Polish nationalism, and we should have to consider the role of the Roman Catholic Church as the resistance of the Roman Catholic Church during the communist period to, so to speak, provide all power to the authorities, eventually providing shelter for the democratic movements, eventually created tension as when a much more liberal orientation was chosen after 1989. There is a split between these two erstwhile allies, that is the democratic movement and the Roman Catholic Church. And therefore, you have, in a sense, a moderate orientation, such as Christian National Union, the League of Polish Families, which eventually lost support and practically disappears as active force. And then radical and anti-European orientations, Radio Maria family, the National Rebirth of Poland, the National Radical Camp, which are postulating exclusion from the global world, separatism, lifestyle conservatism, anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, anti-unionism, Catholic corporatism. Attitude toward use of violence is unclear, but it seems that violence is condoned if necessary. That definition, of course, will be as the word nationalism, although it is it has negative connotations, so the word national, narodowy, and most often collated with the word patriot or patriotism is used in order to define this new movement. And so at the moment we are dealing with the movements attempting to revive the cultural and revolution tradition without political aspirations, such as National Social Union, or the association of the indigenous belief, which corresponds to the ideas that we had in the previous lecture. And the second one are the radical movements, which had tried to have political thrust, and this is anti-Christian movement, the Northern Wolf Order, Lightning, and so on. They are under close scrutiny, but because they are really underground movements, it's very difficult to find out exactly how they fare. Are these large groupings of people? No, not necessarily, but they are associated with some circles, such as, for instance, football fans, certain underground groups that also try to support themselves through less legal means in terms of their financing and so on. So this is a challenge for the security forces. But at the moment, they have not been identified as produces any particular excesses that would be alarming. What is the international cooperation of the groups? There is undocumented contacts of varying intensity with neo-Nazi orientations in the European Union, USA, and Russian Federation. And the relations to neo-Nazi groups find expression both in the ideology as well as in the symbolics and organizational patterns, uniforms, and so on. And Zadruga is one of those organization. Thank you very much. I think time is up.
Okay, thank you, Marek. Any questions from Marek?
So I was studying this problem, but as I know, so named ethnic cultural nationalism was created by Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his reflection of a Polish problem, of Polish question in the 18th century, and in connection with this, firstly, is like his theory, which was connected with his criticism of civilization, is it had an impact on Polish discourses, national and others? So is they directly or indirectly taking his ideas? Firstly, and secondly, is his ideas about nationalism in connection with Polish case are actual during not only the 18th century, 18th and 19th century, but also in 20th and maybe even nowadays.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau was involved in consultations as to the definition of the first Polish constitution, the Constitution of the 3rd May, and he was unhappy with the result. That is, he said that maintaining the supremacy of the gentry estate and, in a sense, not creating a fully democratic form of society was a step backwards. Establishing a constitutional monarchy instead of electoral monarchy was a step backwards. So it was really like an attempt to stave off the onslaught of modernity, that is French Revolution, American Revolution, and so on and so forth, and maintain the Polish traditional order of the gentry supremacy. Numerically, for instance, the Mazovian gentry, which is the people who had the right to vote, at that time constituted 25% of the total population of Mazovia. So it was incomparable to any other European nation where actually such a large segment of population had influence on what type of government or what type of political action is going to be taken. In Britain, 10% of the population had the right to vote only, that is because of census, only in 1875. One of the reasons for the American Revolution was the fact that this denial of participation in the political process somehow sparked the disillusionment, or really, in a sense, rejection of the British parliamentary rule over the colonies. So you had similar sentiment there, and of course, as sometimes the American Revolution is also defined as conservative revolution, it's probably the same case as in the Polish attempt to stave off the total collapse of the country by adopting the Constitution of the 3rd May, which of course eventually did not produce positive results. But it was one step, I mean, not one step too far, but one step back, as a matter of fact, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau has seen it. So I don't know if that answers your question. As to the we have done, to a certain degree, only after 1945, the division of the nation into that, what is the political nation, and the nation that, or the rest of the people who do not have full political rights, was one of the major aspects of the Polish model. Hence also the loss, or at least the failure of the January uprising of 1863, since the Tsar's lifting up of serfdom in the Polish territories basically cut off the potential for recruitment for the uprising. So it was still impossible for the Polish gentry to make this kind of a decision and give political rights to, if we may say, other groups. But they felt, and they were relatively numerous compared to other European nations at the time, yes.
I have a question. Thank you for the speech, first of all, Mr. Szopski. I have a question concerning the modern state of affairs about nationalism in Poland. Last year we saw a tragic case of international, World Cup in Poland, and there was a case of international fans, football fans, disorders, which were framed like nationalistic. Was it framed and considered like nationalistic in Poland? And how strong the nationalistic framing of the state of affairs at all in Poland? Do you understand the question?
The second one, yes. The first part, I don't think. What about the Euro games? What did you?
We had a case about soccer match.
Yes.
Between Russia and Poland.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And that was in Warsaw, yes. And you had a number of clashes, which, as I said, were the effect of the kind of a correlation that exists now between these nationalistic movements or quasi-nationalistic movements, which are not easily identified, and the football fans or the football fan culture, since, and that is now the political dimension, if we might say, nationalist views, if you were exposing them in the public, in Poland, in social circles and so on, will be rather considered embarrassing. You wouldn't do this because that's pushing you into one end of the political spectrum, and that is to the right, to the law and justice party dimension. And although it enjoys something between 25% to 30%, depending on the polls, of the potential electorate, well, it does not seem to have a chance of winning the election to the extent that it would be able to rule independently, yet it does not have, at the same time, coalition potential. So it might get even the highest number of votes, but they will be still falling short of being able to form a government. And if we might say, the other options will rather group together, regardless of what their orientation is, than support this particular party. So I would say that rampant nationalism in Poland is rather something I would not expect to be. There is, if we use anecdotal concepts, there is this whole idea that where there are two poles, there are three political parties. So it's very difficult to get some type of a concerted action with the larger group of people, except maybe for solidarity period. But then you have to have a well-defined enemy in order for this to happen. So if you do not have that kind of a potential alter ego, if we might say, then chances are you will not have a strong nationalistic-oriented government or a party in power in Poland, at least in the near future. I don't think so.
Just a very short one. Is any of these groups you just presented in the Polish Parliament? I mean, how big is
No. These are fringe groups, and they are present, but to have true political representation. They try to enter different kind of coalitions. But I think the Polish society, first of all, is not particularly active politically in general. About 10% of the population is involved in politics. Electoral participation hardly exceeds 50%, and in the local election, 30. So you do not seem to be able to galvanize people for that kind of action. However, of course, you will find the groups that try to define themselves in opposition to that, what is a general tendency. That is, a general tendency is integration with Europe, and membership, continuing membership in NATO, and so on and so on. So being a part of the international community rather than a kind of an independent actor on the sidelines, so to speak. Yes?
Could you specify a bit the way how the values of pan-Slavonic values combine with the strong emphasis on the role of the Catholic Church in nowadays Polish nationalism?
I think that, sorry.
I see some kind of contradiction.
I think that a number of things that Mr. Pietraszyn was speaking of find correspondence. That is, this so-called indigenous belief groups, rodzimowiercy as they are called in Polish, are springing up as a sort of alternative both to the Roman Catholic Church and the what we might call the mainstream definition of Polish identity, right? That is connected with pro-Western, pro-European Union, and pro, what we might say, in the long run, global presence in the world rather than being sort of marginalized in any sense. Yes, but then they are not very numerous. They provide interesting, if we might say, addition to the diversity of the political and cultural scene. Yet up to now, they have not been able to find any major representation in either in political or cultural spectrum. So, but they are being mentioned because the search for what we might call a more definite identity that would distinguish one from the surrounding world, I think is becoming something that is more and more visible all over, let's call it developed world, where different form of identification that goes into a more closely defined smaller groups that can feel the sense of belonging, a sense of community, seems to be now en vogue. To some extent, again, if we use the old Durkheimian definition of solidarity, still a kind of mechanical solidarity of the community versus the organic solidarity of the society, where you're a part of a much bigger project. It's an imagined community, but to a certain degree, if we study now or see things from different perspectives, for instance, the use of internet, the recent studies show that regardless of what happens, we still somehow seem to be willing to go back to our hunter-gathering sense of belonging to a group, which is about 150 people max in a sort of closer contact. So regardless of how many potential addresses and viewers and so on, contacts you have on the blog, on the web. The scrutiny of this shows that there is only a small group of those with whom people correspond very regularly and intimately, and about 150 or so provide the network. So this would be the core community, right? And if you want to refer to a larger society, then what comes in play is what we define as interest. That is, we have to find a specific reason to get in touch with a particular person in a group. So to some extent, Durkheimian analysis might still be handy. I also, this is the last thing I wanted to add to the debate on the ontological status of the nation and so on and so forth. Very extensive, very involved presentations. I didn't touch it, but one thing which might be also used is W.I. Thomas's theorem from Sociology of Religion, in which basically he said that what people believe in is real. That is, that produces social action. It doesn't matter if it is epiphenomenon, not a phenomenon, imagined thing. If people take action, that's real. And so, and it produces results. And these results can be disastrous sometimes, right? So, I think, had any more questions? Thank you very much.